So today I'm going to be showing you how to bake a straightforward whole wheat sourdough loaf of bread. I'm going to be using 50% whole wheat flour and 50% white flour just to lighten that loaf up slightly. Now, as ever, the recipe will be detailed in the description box below, and I'll also leave some notes on temperature / climate, flour and hydration. Right, my name's Philip. Let's get baking some sourdough. So for me, the process begins the day before I'm going to bake at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Given the current temperature, this works perfectly for my schedule, and I'll also pop that in the description box too. Now you'll need to feed your starter so that you've got 145 grams to use for this recipe, and don't forget to calculate enough to save for future baking. Now I feed my starter so that it's always maintained at 100% hydration, and here I'm using 150 grams of water, 150 grams of starter and 150 grams of white flour, which by the way has a protein content of 13.2%. Now, although I'm baking a bread with whole wheat flour, I prefer not to mix whole wheat flour into my starter when I feed it. I prefer to keep the starter maintained and fed with white flour so that it's universal and it can be used for baking pure white sourdough as well. Now combine everything into a bowl, give it a good mix, and we're just going to pop a lid onto the jar to cover it loosely. Now I guess you could say that it's coming into spring here in Greece, and the daytime temperature is around 18 degrees Celsius or 65 degrees Fahrenheit. So my starter will be ready to use in about 8 hours. Now that means that I can mix the dough at around 10 o'clock tonight. The nighttime temperature drops to around 10 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which means the loaf proves perfectly overnight at room temperature. Right, here we are 8 hours later, and in my bowl I'm adding 300 grams of water and 14 grams of sea salt. This will be followed by a quick mix just to dissolve that salt. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, this is a straightforward method. It's designed to be efficient and to fit into normal life schedules, so I'm not going to be stretching and folding. Using a strong flour along with the overnight proof will take care of the gluten development and provide enough strength for the dough to hold shape. Add 145 grams of the starter to a bowl. The starter should be nice and active and ready to use. Next, I'm adding 220 grams of whole wheat flour and 220 grams of strong white flour, which has got a protein content of 13.2%. I blended the two flours together in a separate bowl first. Now it's important to use strong flours here as it helps make the dough nice and strong. The less protein content the flour has, the harder this kind of hands-off method actually becomes. Give everything a mix together. As the starter wasn't fed with whole wheat flour, you'll clearly see it within the mix. Now we want to make sure the starter is well distributed through the other ingredients. No need to go crazy mixing at this point, as we'll cover the dough and we'll let it rest for 30 minutes and then we'll complete the mixing. And after 30 minutes, you can get your hands dirty and make sure everything is well incorporated and you can't see any of that starter remaining in the main dough. I'm going to cover this well. I'm going to leave it out overnight at room temperature. My nighttime temp drops to about 10 degrees Celsius, as I said, so this will sit out happily all night and be ready to use in the morning. Just remember that you may need to adjust the fermentation times depending on your climate and temperatures. Here we are the next day, and the dough has been fermenting overnight for 10 hours at room temperature. Now I'm giving my basket a quick dust with white flour. Remember, as I said, this is a straightforward loaf, so there's going to be no complicated shaping here. I'm going to turn the dough out gently. We don't want to smash the dough around now. It needs to be handled with a light touch, and this light touch also prevents the dough becoming too sticky to handle. Now fold the edges of the dough into the center and flip the dough over, and you should end up with kind of a loose dough ball. Lightly dust the top of the dough ball. Don't use too much flour, otherwise the dough won't be sticky enough to shape properly. Flip the dough over and gently roll the edge over and stick it back down on itself. Repeat this process, rolling the dough up into a fat sausage shape. You can tuck the ends in every now and again as you go just to keep a clean shape, but don't get too caught up in technique here. You can use any method you feel comfortable with to shape the dough. And as you roll that dough over for the last time, just make sure you seal the dough down on itself really well. Dust the top of the dough well, as this is going to help prevent it from sticking to the basket. Confidently but gently turn it over and place it into the basket. Cover with a plastic bag and leave to prove at room temperature. This is going to take about an hour and a half to 2 hours depending on your kitchen temperature. My dough took an hour and a half to proof. My room temperature was 12 degrees Celsius, that's 54 degrees Fahrenheit. And you'll know when the dough's ready as it's going to feel springy and gassy to the touch. Now my oven and baking steel has been preheated to 220 degrees Celsius, that's 430 degrees Fahrenheit, and the oven has been set to bake mode with the fan turned off. I've sprayed my large roasting tin with water, and this will sit over the dough for the first 20 minutes of baking. I'll then remove it and continue to bake the loaf at 220 degrees Celsius, 430 degrees Fahrenheit, for the final 20 minutes. Now you can bake this in a cast iron pan or use a steam method instead, whatever suits you best. I'm dusting the dough with flour and then turning it out onto my peel. I like to brush off any excess flour so that it doesn't burn in the oven, and using a razor blade I'm confidently scoring the dough to allow it to open up as it bakes in the oven. Then it goes straight into the oven following the instructions that I just gave you for the bake. And after 40 minutes of baking, here's our finished loaf. So a beautifully soft loaf with a really earthy, deep taste from that whole wheat flour. Now, if you give this a go, do let me know how you get on in the comments or tag me over at Instagram. It's great to keep up with what you guys are doing. And if you're interested in baking a really good baguette, then you can check out my recipe here. But for now, I'd like to say a huge thank you for watching. I'll see you again very soon. Stay tuned.